My name is Alta, and I am a fighter. When you're in a fight with someone, only one thing matters. Control. Are you in control, or not? Because if you're not, here's what happens. You get hit. Hard. You feel scared. You submit. But if you do the work, if you put in the hours, if you give yourself no excuses, then you take back control. That feeling right there. The moment when you realize that your pain does not have to be an impediment, that it can be what drives you. That's the reason why I became a fighter. It's why I pushed myself harder than anybody I have ever known. I trained like my life depended on it. I did the time. I put in the work. And so, to this day, I have not lost a fight in 3.5 years. Undefeated for that long. God, it took everything, but I earned it. This is what I devoted my entire life to. Finally, I'm here. I made it. I can... I lost?
Wanderstop really stood out to me when I saw the trailer for it at what was either the Summer Games Fest or the Game Awards like a year or so ago. Obviously, with it being from the same mind behind the Stanley Parable and I believe the Beginner's Guide, I knew it would be a narrative-heavy and thought-provoking experience. While a bit long for the kind of game that it is, at 9 hours on average to complete according to How Long to Beat, I don't really want to lob that at the kind of game, or at this kind of game, as a complaint. Without spoiling the story, this game really emphasizes the slow down and take a breather approach, which runs contrast to a lot of games that you just quickly beat and move on from. So the real question is, if I wasn't trying to finish it for a review, would I have mentioned that it was a bit long for my taste? Honestly, who knows? What I do know is that what I did experience was a beautifully written, wonderfully composed story about just taking a moment to sip some tea. So make a brew for yourself as I tell you the tale of my time with Wanderstop. In Wanderstop, you play as Alta, a former champion fighter, who, after a series of defeats, sets off to train under Master Winters to essentially get her groove back. Little did she know, in her careless pursuit to be the very best like no one ever was, she'd collapse from fatigue in a forest where she'd be discovered by Boro, the owner of the tea shop Wanderstop. With nothing she can do but let her body recover, Alta aids Boro around the shop, serving tea to many customers that come to visit, from the wacky to the dramatic to the annoying. Something I can say off the bat with Wanderstop is that Alta and Boro, who are essentially dual protagonists, are a delight to focus on. This is because the two contrast heavily in their personalities and perspectives. Alta is a cynical, rude, angry, impatient, and bitter person, while Boro is a sweet, gentle, lovable giant. Giant, relatively speaking, compared to Alta. The two complement each other's personalities very well, and seeing how they interact throughout the story is really touching. You can't really sleep on the other characters that come through the shop though, because they will leave some kind of impression as well. But time does go on in this game. You'll have to get used to not seeing some customers again, hearing their stories, hearing what they do, and just watching them move on. Now, this won't just happen as in they show up and then they're there and then they leave at some point. It's more like they show up, they're there for however long you're in that part of the game, and then you have to move on to the next part. So that, I'm not going to explain how that happens, and I apologize if that is some kind of spoiler, but in my mind, not quite. But I'm just saying, characters will come, They will move on. And whatever impression you left on them, well, that's it. Whatever impression they left on you, well, that's it. You just get to sit with that. And that reflects reality. Some people only show up for a season. If you're a barista, bartender, whatever, you'll hear all kinds of stories, all kinds of things that people tell you, and then they're gone. It is what it is. So I don't know if this game has multiple endings, but it certainly felt like it could have gone in a variety of different directions had I picked different dialogue options with those people that came through. Overall, the story of Wanderstop is a very introspective one. It reaches deep into Alta's character, but also into yours. If you watched my review of Dungeons of Hinterberg, then you'll know how much that game made me just want to disconnect from the world and go to a land I haven't been to just simply relax and simply be. Well, Wanderstop really tackles the second half of that. It's a story of simply being, a story of being mindful instead of being anxious about the future, about worrying about where you're going to be tomorrow, where you're going to be next month, about where you're going to be next year, about what happened yesterday or 2 days ago, a week ago, all of that. It simply just says, hey, here's some tea. Isn't that a nice flower? You should smell that flower. That smelled great, right? Okay, now smell the next one. Take another sip. What are you doing right now? You're existing. Without spoiling how the story twists and turns for Alta, I can tell you that by the end I did tear up a little bit. I won't say any more than that. Visually, the game is gorgeous to look at with a beautiful score to match. Both are very simple in a way without doing too much, but they're very effective where it counts. In fact, Wanderstop's presentation reminds me of a storybook where you'd flip through the pages and likely see this exact same art style in it, while reading it in a coffee shop blasting some very soft piano tunes. Sorry, not coffee, tea. Tea is the main focus here. In fact, let's move on to gameplay to talk about the tea for a second. Hilariously, making the tea in Wanderstop is probably the most complex thing you'll do in the game, since everything else you can do is completely optional. Want to go trim the weeds and the thorns coming up from the ground? Feel free to do so. You might get a goodie when you do, like a extra teacup that you have to wash through the complicated dishwasher that Boro has. Want to make yourself some tea and go sit somewhere and drink it? You can do that too, and you'll hear Alta's soliloquy while you do so. I had to actually look up the difference between monologue and soliloquy because I often get those mixed up. It'd be like that. The tea also has its own unique effects that it can have on whoever drinks it. These effects aren't permanent, but they will affect the topic that Alta wants to talk about while she's sitting there drinking the tea. As for serving customers, that is something you will have to do to progress. Customers will give you specific, and sometimes not very specific, orders to make. And it's your job to use the overcomplicated contraption to make them a cup of tea. It's ridiculous how involved that thing is, but it's also really cool. After you successfully make a customer some tea, you'll generally learn more about them. If you fail, they'll just tell you this isn't what they wanted and ask you to make it for them again. But you're not running to a counter to grab tea packs or anything like that. Nope. You're running into the clearing, grabbing some tea leaves, drying the tea leaves, grabbing any fruit seeds you find, using various grid patterns to plant the fruit seeds, watering them, and then you take what you've gathered and you make the tea in the overly complicated contraption. But Darryl, that already sounds overly complicated, or at least overly involved. Yes, but there's more. Once you get to the contraption, you need to climb the ladder, pour the water into the boiler thing, and then you have to fan the flames so it actually boils it. Then send that water, that hot water, or sometimes cold, depends on the order, over to where you can toss in the dried tea leaves. And then you can toss in the fruit. And then after that, you have to swing around again to actually pull the lever to pour the tea through the large tubes into the smaller tubes, into the pot itself, into more small tubes, into the cup. Overcomplicated. But again, this isn't a criticism of it. I just think it's really funny how a game that involves chilling and just simply existing and enjoying a cup of tea also has you hustling around a giant overcomplicated contraption where you have to climb a ladder up and down, swing around it like it's a Willy Wonka's chocolate factory looking, you know what I mean. It's pretty funny. And thankfully, you've got a field guide to help you out with all of this in case you get lost, including a book that is upstairs that you can read that'll just essentially tell you directly how to do something if you're really that stuck. Borrow comments on it on the game saying like, or in the game saying, oh yeah, that exists upstairs, but you know, I don't like to use it. I like to just kind of, you know, mess around and find out. And Alta, you can choose whether or not you want to use it, but frankly, it doesn't really matter what you say. It's up there if you want to look it up and just speed things along, or you can try and figure it out yourself. Figuring it out isn't necessarily difficult. It's just how much time do you want to spend doing this? It's one of those things. And without getting into spoilers, once again, the game does find some cool ways to change it up, so you're preparing the tea a little differently, or throwing some different, sometimes concerning stuff into the contraption to make said tea. Overall, I find the gameplay loop very enjoyable and very chill. And yes, you can pet the little penguin dudes. That should be more than enough for you to realize that this is a fantastic game. Beyond everything I said, there isn't much else to say about the game. It's a very peaceful, narratively heavy experience that I think just about everyone should play. So yes, Wanderstop gets a go for it from me. The only people I wouldn't recommend this to are people who don't care much for narrative games that are 50-50 with how often you'll get voice cutscenes. I also can't say I'd recommend this to anyone who needs something to almost always be happening. The game moves at its own pace, mostly, and even comments on the fact that if you don't have any orders to complete at the moment, you should just go find something to do around the shop or just chill on a bench until someone needs something. Most of the time when I've had that going on, I would just go pick some dry leaves, some tea leaves, and dry them out, plant some extra plants just to make sure I'm ready for the next go. Otherwise, yeah, I am just hanging around, petting the little penguin dudes. So if you're the kind of player that doesn't like waiting for a game to give you your next objective, then you'd probably struggle to get into Wanderstop. Otherwise, for the rest of you, play it. Wanderstop is available on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S for $25. I won't lie to you, I'm surprised I don't see a Switch version of the game as well, but hey, maybe it'll be on the Switch too or something. Who knows? That's all from me though, so I hope you've enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you all next time.